Love Jihad and Other Fictions, Simple Facts to Counter Viral Falsehoods, Sreenivasan, Jain, Mariyam, Alavi, in conversation with Manjari, Katju, and I will of course leave the introductions of the authors to the moderator, but may I request all three of them to take their seats on the dais, please. And ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Sreenivasan Jain, Mariyam Alavi for this wonderful book, Love Jihad and Other Viral Falsehoods. Let me quickly take a minute or two to introduce our moderator for this session. Manjari Katju is a professor of political science at University of Hyderabad. Her book, Electoral Practice and the Election Commission of India, was published in 2023. She also researches and writes on issues of religious nationalism and democracy. And I will leave it to Manjari to introduce Sreenivasan Jain and Mariyam Alavi and conduct the session just with a quick kind of a proviso that we will have 50 minutes for the session and 40 minutes for the discussion and then 10 minutes for the Q&A. Thank you very much and over to you, Manjari.
A very warm welcome to Mariyam. On behalf of the HLF, on behalf of the audience, I welcome you. And hopefully it will be an interesting session, and hopefully the audience is sitting with a number of interesting questions. I don't need to introduce Sreenivasan Jain and Mariyam Alavi, but they are award-winning journalists. But just to list out their accomplishments, I thought I'll just put in a few words. Of course, there are three authors to this book. Besides the two of them, there's Supriya Sharma as well, but she couldn't be with us today. Sreenivasan Jain, of course, award-winning journalist. Got the Ramnath Goenka Award, Red Ink Award, World Media Summit Award, and World Silver Medal Award from New York, amongst many others. He has looked at, investigated a number of issues, number of controversial issues, number of issues which have informed us as a society. He was for a number of years with the NDTV, and that was a time we also used to look up to NDTV for news, real news. So welcome, Sreenivasan. We also have with us another award-winning journalist, Mariyam Alavi, the second author of this book. She's also has got a number of prestigious awards, one of them being the International Press Institute India's award. So welcome, Mariyam. And Supriya Sharma, the third author of the book who couldn't be with us today, again, an award-winning journalist. Now she's executive editor with the Scroll. So with that, I'll begin the conversation. The very first thing which I want to ask both of them is, we know Hindutva in theory, in a conceptual framework, and that's one side of Hindutva. And the other side of Hindutva is ordinary life, how it's percolating down in ordinary life, in practical matters. So, in that context, I want to ask you, what are the themes you are exploring in the book and why? So, over to you, Mariyam, and then Sreenivasan.
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Manjari, for that. So the book is called Love Jihad and Other Fictions. I know a lot of people tend to get stuck on that Love Jihad title, part of the title. But the book actually looks at a number of theories that have come, that has come from a space of right-wing conspiracy theories, but has percolated down to being a part of everyday discourse. People use these terms as without any context anymore to stand in for everyday situations in life. So we've looked at things like love jihad in the book, we've looked at population jihad, we've looked at forced conversions, we've looked at appeasement. So essentially the theme of the book is, there is this Hindutva idea that Hindus khatre mein hai, right? How are they in danger? Because there is this overwhelming effort to reduce the Hindu population in India, which is almost 80% currently, to a minority. Now, how are they doing that? They are doing that by population jihad, which is overbreeding, illegal immigrants coming in, fertility rates, etc., by marrying multiple wives. If that doesn't work, the other way to do that is by luring and trapping gullible, so-called gullible, but adult women and getting them to convert into Islam. There's also, it's not just the Muslims who are doing this, there's also the Christians who are just 2%, 2.3% of the population, but for some reason, this 2.3% is going to overwhelm the 80% very soon. They're forcibly converting people into Christianity, and they're doing this covertly. Why is all this possible? Because for years, the opposition parties have been appeasing minorities, and they've been given undue advantages. And that's the underlying theme of the book. But if you look at, we have broken down each one of those, and each one of them do not stand the test of evidence. None of them have any evidence or facts to back their claims. And if you read the book, you will see all of that. And I'm going to leave some for Vasu to talk about as well. You want to add to that?
So thank you, Manjari, and also thank you, Hyderabad Lit Fest, for having us here. Just to build on what Mariyam is saying, I think that this book is really about power and about, in a sense, the big lie. So when we talk about falsehoods and we talk about disinformation, sometimes the conversation can become very general. And you can have all sorts of falsehoods in life. Like you could have a falsehood about you can cure COVID by standing on your head for 5 hours a day. But then you can also have the big lie, which is when those in power perpetuate divisive or hateful lies or falsehoods which can unsettle societies and divide for their political gain. And we saw an example of that in America, where Trump perpetuated the big lie that he never lost the last election, not the one he just won, but the one before that in 2020. And how much that eroded America's democratic foundation. Here, the big lie is, as Mariyam said, the idea that over 1 billion Hindus are under threat from 200 million Muslims and an even smaller percentage of Christians, which in any other society or context would sound absurd. But that's now coming from the highest tiers of the government. And so the book is a response to that. And I think that's something we have to be very clear about, that this isn't just emanating from anywhere. If we just look at the time cycle from when the book came out in January, and by May or January of last year, in May during the elections, the Prime Minister, no less, is perpetuating the false idea that Muslims, and say those who produce more babies and those who are infiltrators, if the Congress or the opposition wins, then the wealth of Hindus is going to be snatched and given to them. This is coming from the Prime Minister. In the Jharkhand elections, which came fairly soon afterwards, Amit Shah, Home Minister, the entire galaxy of BJP leaders, in fact that's the core thrust of the BJP campaign, was that Muslims are forcibly converting tribal women in order to acquire tribal land. So it's a mix of love jihad and land jihad, right? So that's where we are today. And to your point about Hindutva, about the idea of an everyday Hindutva, these are all theories that existed in the fringes of the Hindutva ecosystem. They were always around, but they have never gotten the kind of amplification that they have now, where they're being platformed by the highest tiers of power, and as we pointed out in the book, they're being passed into law. So there are now actually so-called anti-love jihad laws passed in a number of BJP states, for instance, which are being used to intimidate and harass consensual Hindu-Muslim couples. So our attempt was to both speak truth to power, that is, call out these falsehoods, which is the job of what journalists should do, but it's also to persuade and to convince what we think is a vast majority of sensible Indians who are consuming this toxic narrative day in and day out from the government, from the media, and may actually start to believe that some of it is true. So the attempt was to not sort of castigate or to sort of say there's this whole section of society who've turned into bigots or Islamophobes, but to persuade them through facts rather than rhetoric. So if you look at the book, it's very much written like in the form of how you would investigate corruption or how you would investigate any other wrong or malfeasance through data and ground reports and court records and police reports, and hopefully then let the facts speak for themselves.
That's my second question. Related to what you said, that you have done the book in this mode of claims and conclusions. How did you get the idea to do the book in that particular way?
So, actually, we wanted to make the book sort of easily accessible and easily readable because after all, we are in an age of high levels of distraction and limited attention spans. So we didn't want to turn it into something which was too academic and too heavy. So actually, if you look at it, it's a fairly light, it's a slim book. We've crunched a lot of data and facts into, concise arguments. And the claim conclusion format came out of that. So, the genesis of the book came from the time when Mariyam and I were in NDTV and we used to work on a show called Reality Check, where we'd often debunk these sorts of theories on a nightly basis. And that's the format we use, which is a kind of visual TV friendly format where you say, this is the claim and then this is the conclusion. So we thought we'd try and adapt it in a book form so that it's like a way for the reader to say, okay, here's a quick, like a gist of what we found. So
let me add to that. While the book, you could have, done reports or some, clips, videos and put them up. You explained somewhere that why you decided that it should be in a book form rather than in, short snippets form.
Sure. So these were themes that we were like Vasu was mentioning. Sreenivasan, Jain and I used to work in NDTV together in the show called Reality Check in Truth versus Hype before that. And we tackled these issues almost on a nightly basis on our shows. But they were always about A, standalone cases, and B, there's also that ephemeral nature of news, right? Like the broadcast of last hour doesn't even exist anymore. Papers of yesterday have no value the next day. So we wanted something that's a little bit more long lasting, that lasts beyond the shorter lifespan of a news cycle. We wanted something that would last longer, for that reason a book. And also, we didn't want to look at individual cases. There were enough cases out there for us to compile all of them, to look at it and to identify trends and patterns, and to show you that there have been sort of, they're almost formulaic, right? Like if you look at love jihad cases, it is, any interfaith relationship is now tagged love jihad. It could including consensual relationships. Crimes against women, if the man happens to be a Muslim and the woman happens to be a Hindu, it's called love jihad at times. So there were all these trends and patterns that we could identify, and that was only possible through a book to actually collate all those cases together and help identify those patterns. Yeah.
And how long did, as a researcher and as a teacher, I was just thinking that, all these 4-5 themes are, very heavy themes. They are sort of, you have to go to the heart, you have to go to the real depth of investigation there. So how long did you take to put the book together, gathering all the facts and doing all the research on the ground?
I think it probably took us end to end about a year and a half to do that. But I think we were helped by the fact that we had, firstly there were 3 of us working on it. Like you mentioned, Supriya, who's unfortunately not here, Supriya Sharma, who did Scroll, was one of the co-authors. And also the fact that some of the material that we've put out in the book is stuff that we already had or we were working on. So we had a chance to build on that. So that was roughly the timeline that the book took.
Also, just to tell you, a year and a half for a book that might seem like a long time, but what you don't see is the mountains and mountains of work and research that has gone. Because like he said, we wanted to make it accessible. So it meant distilling complex data into bite-sized, palatable pieces, and so that takes a lot of time as well.
My next question is that you make a very interesting point, and that's something which concerns us all, is something very unsettling, very disturbing, that how these fake messages, the falsehoods which are there, for instance, love jihad and population jihad, how those falsehoods, they have had a long time of circulation amongst us socially, but now they're getting translated into policy, into laws. Can you throw a bit of light on that? What did your research highlight?
So you're right. So like we've mentioned earlier as well. So some of these cases, in terms of the theory of forced conversions or love jihad or appeasement, it's always existed, but it's existed on the fringe. The problem now is that it has been mainstreamed like never before. Like Vasu was mentioning at the beginning of the session, it is now being platformed at the highest levels, from the Prime Minister to the Home Minister. There are people in positions of power and responsibility irresponsibly platforming these lies. There's no other way to say it, they are lies. That's where this thing comes from, right? Like, that's why we were forced to take this head on, and we said we needed to put this down, we need to write a book. Somebody needs to tackle these topics head on, somebody needs to tell you why these are lies and what's happening. States have passed laws based on this. So the starting of the book, one of the first lines in the book is today's WhatsApp forward, tomorrow's law. Stuff that were confined to the fringes are now being passed into law, into legislation, so which is why we thought we needed to take that head on, yes.
So, I think as Mariyam was saying, and I mentioned that the shift is 2014, right? So, the fact that this entire manner in which the nature of the Indian state is turning into what we are today as we head into this time of majoritarianism, it's kind of autocratic majoritarianism. So this book is very much a product of that context. So that the point you were asking about, how these theories are gaining ground is precisely because, and we give an example of this. There are so many, but we give an example in the book of a WhatsApp forward that routinely does the round of social media, that in the movie Sholay, there is electricity given to the Muslim part of the fictional village of Ramgarh and denied to the Hindu part of the village. Poor Thakur has no electricity while Salim Chacha has electricity. Because the writers of Sholay were Muslim, Salim Javed. This is a WhatsApp theory that is routinely part of the right-wing ecosystem. Cut to Yogi Adityanath, Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, who is standing at an election rally saying that more electricity was generated in Eid or was supplied in Eid by the Samajwadi Party government than during Diwali. So, just see the manner in which a completely scurrilous and baseless WhatsApp forward actually gets platformed by a constitutional authority. Now, that's one of the claims we fact-checked. In the book, we actually had to look at electricity data. Even if you make it, even if the claim is preposterous, we still have to call it out. And obviously, it shows you that there's no such thing. So, the impunity with which today's political establishment is giving air to these theories, and the manner in which they're getting passed into law and into the sort of social common sense is frightening. And the key thing to remember here, Manjari, is that, again, to your point about why the virality, is the fact that there are no checks, there are no consequences, right? We have courts, we have the election commission, we have the law of the land, we do have notionally institutions that are meant to act as brakes, because some of these comments, frankly, violate virtually all these jurisdictions, right? You can go to jail for saying the kind of things that are said from the platform. But we saw the craven manner in which all these institutions are simply not able to respond. The election commission did not have the guts to send the Prime Minister a notice for making blatantly divisive and false comments. So in an unprecedented manner, they sent a letter to the party president. So, and then, to balance it out, they did the same with the Congress. So ultimately, this is also a question of, and I mean, we didn't get into that in the book, we only got into it somewhat, is the complete absence of accountability by the institutions which are meant to hold power to account. I mean, as journalists and fact checkers, we can do our bit, but really it's there where, the accountability lies.
But I'm just going to add to that, like Vasu said, as journalists and fact checkers, we can do our bit, but the fact of the matter is that the media has also not done its bit. So if you look at the book, when it comes to Love Jihad, we've analyzed a list by the VHP, one of the only lists, so-called database of Love Jihad cases out there. They listed about close to 150 cases, of which 75 were immediately eliminated because they were either missing serial numbers or repetitions, etc. So we had about 74 unique cases there. And what we realized is that in many of these cases, it's not the woman who's supposed to be given the agency to decide whether what's happened with her is right or wrong, whether it was consensual or not. It was not the woman who was saying that there's something wrong been done with her. It's not her complaining that she was coerced or she was forced or she was done wrong with. It was either her family, and in many cases, it's the media who had labeled the cases a case of love jihad with no context. You had headlines screaming, love jihad fir se UP mein, love jihad in Karnataka, love jihad in this thing. It was just there in the headline, and you had no idea why, and it was used as a stand-in term for an interfaith relationship. It was nothing more than that.
Yes, I think I'm happy that you highlighted these two things: the role of the media and the whole patriarchy, which pervades these issues. In fact, my own study of the VHP, this is what sort of used to come to light, and your evidence also has pointed towards this, that the women, girls, they're into higher education, they've got degrees, they're choosing their partners, but they're still regarded as innocent lambs who have to be directed with no agency, with no viewpoint, and just being dragged by the families, and then, in some instances, drugged and brought to court, and giving a completely contrary opinion. So, apart from the bigotry, the hatred, it's the whole patriarchy of it as well, which actually disturbs a lot.
Yeah,
and in this day and age.
So, just to pick up on that, of the many theories that we've tackled, it's true that in some ways Love Jihad is the cruelest because it targets, it not only calls into question the agency of women, it's serving many purposes, but it's also targeting interfaith relationships, which are such a small and fragile part of our social fabric. The Hindu right makes it seem like this is a mass-scale phenomenon, but the only available data points to only about 2.5% interfaith marriages, and that's interfaith as a whole, it's not specific to Hindu Muslim.
And you amplify it.
And to amplify it, and not just amplify it, again, since the book has come out, UP, which already has a so-called anti-love jihad law, has made it even more stringent, where punishment is now life. You can get life imprisonment if you're found guilty under the law. And I think just a few months ago, a court in Bareilly has actually sentenced a Muslim man to life for what, if you just go by media reports, is yet another consensual interfaith relationship. So it's actually now reached a point where you can, it's not just about jail or the disruption of your, of your life and your day-to-day functioning. You can spend the rest of your life in jail on the basis of a made-up theory.
And the problem here is that it's your name that determines the crime, right? If the man is a Muslim, it becomes a case of love jihad. If the man is not Muslim and is from another faith, it becomes a case of interfaith relationship. In fact, in the book we do cite, so one of the things that they talk about with love jihad is, now the problem with love jihad is that there is no defined, proper, static definition of what the case is. So they initially tell you it's about forced conversion, then they say no, it's about luring, it's about fake identity, it's about hidden identities, etc., etc., etc. So one of the cases, one example that they give you is that Muslim men hide their identity to entrap gullible, naive Hindu women under the guise of love, with the aim of later converting them to Islam. Now, if this is the case, we have an example in the book of Ramesh Chandra Swain from Odisha, who is by his name, of course, not Muslim. He's married about 18 times, faking his identity. He will not face the same kind of stringent laws that if his name was different, if he was called, say, Muhammad or an Aslam or an Ali, the punishment would have been much different under these new laws. And that's attacking the very core of the equality before law ideals of our constitution that we live by.
I wanted you to, for our audience, to throw light on the role of the media, which you had mentioned just a moment ago. How does what is the overall in the media ecosystem? Which way does it go? I know it's very difficult for you to, like put an opinion for everybody, but just as an indicative, just as your impression, can you sort of bring it up in front of our audience?
You mean in terms of how the media approaches?
Approaches issues like this.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll be saying anything very original to point out that the media, for the vast part, especially television news, over the past decade, have become active amplifiers and propagandists of all these theories. So it's a perfect trifecta between something that originates on WhatsApp or in the fringes of the right-wing ecosystem, it's amplified by a politician, which is headlined by the media, and then in turn finds its way back onto social media. So it's like a self-fulfilling loop. Now, again, and we don't have to now get into all the reasons why the media has decided to choose this path, those are now fairly well known. But again, I would simply stress on the absence of consequences. Right? Like, even the media does follow certain guidelines. There are certain guardrails under which it operates. And the fact that you can have anchors going on night after night and coming up with all these ludicrous charts about this jihad and that jihad. There was the infamous case where an anchor came up with UPSC jihad, that Muslims are somehow trying to infiltrate the civil service. A rare instance where the Supreme Court had to actually pull him up. But for the most part, whether it's and as a journalist, I would never ask for consequences of my own fraternity. But some of these people now, I think the ship has sailed as far as, I don't even know if they can be considered media. But there is both the internal self-regulatory broadcast organization, there are the courts, there is the police. This stuff night after night is doing immeasurable damage. But again, there is just simply no check, balance, or consequence.
Let me connect this to the world we are living in, a very digitized world, the world of social media, and one side of it is that it's this this atmosphere, this whole network of the social media, which is sort of amplifying and sort of enlarging some of these issues. But on the other side, social media is also coming up with some counters. What is your view? Is it or it's not? Television news, we know what it is now, but can a counter come at the level of the social media, or you think it's not something which we are hopeful about?
So, the problem with social media is, like you said, there are counters, etc. coming up, but with the kind of algorithms, etc. that exist on social media, confirmation bias is very easily possible, right? Like, you live in these little echo chambers because they want you to be on their platforms for longer. They will show you content that you're interested in or you already believe in, which means that they're probably sort of helping reinforce some of these conspiracy theories if you thought they were to be true, right? But there has to be a way, which is why, again, I'm going to come back to the media, etc. Something that goes outside of that algorithm, right? That's not ruled by that algorithm. Journalists, fact checkers, etc. need to do their job and need to make sure that we call out these instances. Yes, our job is to report, but our job is not to report without questioning, right? You have to question. So now, if not related to the book, but if you see recently with the IIT Madras director talking about the benefits of cow urine, and if you drink cow urine, within 15 minutes your fever gets better, etc. And then he later on doubled down on that and presented about 5 research papers and a patent as evidence of this. A lot of media houses reported on this, but the problem is nobody actually looked into that evidence. My team here, where I work with, we looked into that. Of the 5 papers he cited, one paper has in its sources 3 references. Does that sound like a scientifically sound study? No. Two studies have plagiarized each other with exactly verbatim lines in both studies. That again talks to you about the quality of the research given there. One is an in vitro research that was done, and in fact goes on to say that you need to have more human trials to make sure that this actually works for people as well. Another was not related to fever or IBS like he talks about. The patent that he talks about has long since been expired. None of that, those contexts is not given. You've just simply reported that the IIT Madras director said this, and this is what he said to support his claim. Nobody is actually questioning what is being said. That needs to be done.
So just on the point of social media, I think that it's true that there are, I would look at it more like digital spaces where there is pushback against this tide of falsehoods and bigotry and so much of what we're seeing in the present moment. And so it's a few online sites and platforms, largely, and some independent media outlets who are trying to stem against the tide. But again, Manjari, coming back to the point I made earlier, that it's a complete asymmetry of power, right? What can a small bunch of fact checkers, digital sites, etc., all of whom are struggling for funds, all of whom are under severe duress because in many cases the government has gone after them, compete against the Prime Minister of the country and the entire cabinet and multiple state governments who are all amplifying this every day, which in turn is then picked up by their organized social media armies and further pushed out. If you do try to push back, there are consequences for you, not for them. So everyone remembers the example of Mohammed Zubair of Alt News, which is one of the many sites, handful of sites I'd say actually, not many, pushing back, who faced multiple FIRs for hate speech for simply pointing out that there is hate speech by XYZ, religious leader and whatnot, was running from pillar to post trying to get out of those web of cases. So it's unfortunately a completely lopsided matrix of power, and it's really only going to change either, as I said, if institutions wake up, which I don't really see that happening. Right in Hyderabad itself, we have an MLA, the honorable representative from Gosha Mahal, T. Raja Singh, who has, I think he makes a hate speech on an hourly, daily, weekly basis, no consequences. So either the institutions kick in, or people, voters, begin to realize the consequences of electing the same set of people back to power, and what that's doing to society.
But it's people versus big money, really massive money as well. So we actually don't know. Anyways, that's a different question. But you brought up the question of state institutions and their role, I should say complicity in sort of endorsing these things as they becoming part of policies and laws, and our legal structure is transforming in a very fundamental way. But what you also bring out when you talk about state institutions is the role of the judiciary. The role of the judiciary, almost every time the cases are ending up there for some sort of remedy, for some sort of solace to the victims. But the role of the judiciary is also a little ambiguous, a little sort of zigzag. It's as far as these falsehoods are concerned.
No, absolutely. I would say that ambiguous. I'd say to a large part they have not managed to basically maintain the line. They've not managed to essentially put a check on the passage of many of these laws. In fact, the famous or the infamous Stanislaus verdict, which goes back decades, was, and we mentioned this in the book, was the beginning of a whole spate of anti-conversion laws. These laws are so draconian that you simply cannot convert. They're supposedly targeting forcible or illegal conversions, but they virtually make all conversions illegal. And this was challenged, the first sets of laws was passed after independence in the 50s and 60s. They were challenged in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did not manage to essentially find them illegal. And that has led to where we are today. Having said that, I would say that there are occasional High Court orders, particularly Supreme Court, I would say is still 50-50, but there are a number of High Court orders recently, in fact, which are quite, progressive, bold. I just made a note of the Himachal High Court, which in 2012, in a challenge to the anti-conversion law of that state, said that a person not only has the right of conscience, the right of belief, the right to change his belief, but also has the right to keep his beliefs secret. Because these laws require that you publish the fact that you're converting. You have to put it up at the collector's office, making you vulnerable to all kinds of hostilities, threats, and so on. So there are from time to time some pushback from the courts, but by and large, it's not enough. And I would say the Supreme Court really is where I think the buck has to stop.
My last question before I open up. You use a very interesting term. I found it a very interesting, very telling phrase, oxygen of power. So, can you just elaborate that?
Vasu, take that on because it was your turn of phrase as well.
That doesn't matter. In a co-authored book, who came up with what phrase? But no, I think that's to us. I think that's the starting point of this entire journey because we are political journalists, and it's not really our beat. It wasn't our domain to look into. Whether the film writers of Sholay were communally oriented in putting a script together, or whether Shah Rukh Khan is guilty of population jihad because he married someone called Gauri. The reason why we delved into it is because these were coming from those in power, and this is coming from the political terrain, which is our landscape. And so without the oxygen of power, you would not have a scenario of the kind that we have today, where even as we speak, there are cases being registered against interfaith couples in at least 5 to 6 Indian states, where you have, members of the Christian community routinely being harassed or arrested under highly problematic anti-conversion laws, and so on and so forth. So I think that's really where the problem lies, and unless there is some way of reducing that flow of oxygen, it's not cutting it off, we're in trouble.
Now Sreenivasan, Mariyam, some questions from the audience. Please raise your hands and yes, please go ahead.
Hi. You mentioned about the person with an Islamic name is being, punished in a different way compared to this one, right? The only solution I see for that is having a uniform, both civil and the criminal law, right? I know it's a big debate and all that stuff, but what's your view on that? Otherwise, it's never going to change, right? Is my question clear now?
Sorry, I couldn't follow the question.
No, you mentioned about an individual with an Islamic name being punished in slightly much more. If you talk about somebody marrying 18 times and all, right? A Hindu name, he would be punished in a different way and all that by law. The same if you basically go to extrapolate it to civil and all, the only solution I see for that is to have a uniform law, both criminal and civil, irrespective of what an individual religion individual follows. So what's your view on that? Is that the only solution you look at? But I don't think you really support the UCC and all that stuff, right? So.
No, I don't think this really pertains to the UCC. The UCC applies to personal laws. The civil and criminal laws of this country are on paper religion neutral. So even the so-called anti-jihad, anti-love jihad law doesn't specify that it's meant to target Muslims. It's the manner in which it's applied. So it's the nature of the application. It's the distortion or the misuse of the law. I mean, the law's intent itself is problematic, but its selective use is the problem. So ultimately, unless these laws are either repealed or challenged in court, I don't really see any change.
And I don't think you need a new law to apply to everybody on this thing because fraud, etc. are already outlawed under earlier IPC and now the BNS. These are already illegal acts, right? So you don't need a new anti-love jihad or these laws to come in for its force and coercion and all that are already outlawed, which we mention in the book as well.
Yeah, this is Divakar. We are in an innovation city. we are trying to do a lot of innovations, but across the globe, this Jihad innovation in India is happening. Love Jihad 2.0, Land Jihad, Biryani Jihad. There are some multiple jihads are coming in. So what is the counteraction plan? Because this never-ending plans and innovations, how do we address this?
Sorry, I couldn't understand the import of your question. Our case is that these are all bogus theories. There is no such thing as love jihad. There is no such thing as land jihad. This is the creation of the Hindu right and amplified by the ruling establishment. So the answer to this is for those who are propagating these theories to stop. That's it.
That friend in the glasses there. Yes.
Thank you so much. Your work, I think, has been really crucial, and I've loved your talk as well. I guess I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of us here who come across this sort of news, and then we think it's really absurd and we're smiling, but we also kind of like living under the rocks that we are under, in the sense that we don't, I guess we're not doing what you're doing, as in getting into the field and, trying to debunk this news by ourselves. We're not getting our hands dirty, essentially. I guess I wanted to ask, what has the weight been for you in doing this sort of research? Like, what has kept you going in some ways? What has the weight been, and what has driven you in your journey, I guess? Thank you.
So like we mentioned during the talk as well, we had seen, as journalists, we had been reporting on these as individual cases, etc. But we realized that we needed something that lasts beyond the news cycle, and we wanted somewhere where we not look at these as standalone, a one-off cases, but actually a large, sinister pattern and trend that's emerging. It was a lot of heavy work. It was difficult. I myself have a Muslim-sounding name. I have a family. I have a son. I was pregnant while I was researching for this book. I remember waking up. I've spoken about this on a podcast earlier as well. I remember while I was pregnant, towards the end of this book, waking up my husband at about 2 a.m. and telling him, we really need to decide what we're going to name the child. Do we need to make a conscious decision? Do we want a neutral sounding name where he or his people will not try to judge his religious identity just based on his name? Or do we want, do we want to explicitly have a Muslim sounding name or what? Because like I said during the talk as well, going forward in his future, based on his name, he could be judged differently from his peers. So it was a very difficult thing to go through while researching for this book. It was a lot of work, but I feel that it was work that somebody needed to take on, and I'm glad it was us.
Hi, my question is to the journalists who moved from mainstream media, primarily working independently now. I have two questions. One is how the resources or the access to resources have been compromised. Is it very dramatic? How do you work about it? And the second part to it is how do you both of you work for institutions like News Dolby, News Minute, and others as well. So how do you increase the access more in the young generation who want to see, a debate which is not on the top of the voice, not just shouting. So how do you increase? What do you think? How can we increase the access to such things? Thank you.
So. Obviously, when you shift from, I was in an organization for 30 years, and you shift from that to being a kind of solo, independent journalist, it's a pretty dramatic shift in terms of both the resources you can access, because I had the entire organizational network that could help you get your information and get your news. And now you have to sort of find your own way on your own. You can't just call up people in different parts of the country, like you have bureaus everywhere, you can't call them up. Accessing people in authority, particularly officials, private sector, public sector, it's very different when you're a freelancer and an independent journalist versus being part of an institution. How will they respond to you or will they not respond to you? So I think that's one big shift. But at the same time, I'd say that as far as reaching audiences, especially younger audiences are concerned, I think working with some of these digital platforms like I have for the past year and a half it's actually been great because when you're sitting in that mainstream TV box or bubble, you don't really realize how much audience and viewership and how news is consumed, and how much that's changing. And I really had no idea, for example, how widely News Laundry was watched or any of these sites were watched and consumed till I actually started working for them. And then I would get feedback from, just people I would run into on the street or online. And it's quite remarkable how many people, especially young people, are getting their news from these platforms. So I think it's been a great learning. I mean, obviously these are platforms operating under great stress. They're financially, there's duress, so please contribute to all of them. But it's like an exciting and new thing for me. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nandita. I had a question to ask that are you seeing any efforts from the opposition parties to sort of counter this narrative, a more concerted effort? The one thing that I can think of is during the general elections, we saw the citing of the constitution that was brought up time and again to counter the sort of narratives that we are seeing from the mainstream, from the ruling party. So what is the kind of efforts that you see, and how do you think the opposition can sort of get their act together to challenge these narratives? Because I feel that I'm from Mumbai, and I think that it is now spreading to Maharashtra as well. Maharashtra government is also been thinking of bringing laws around this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is the opposition is simply not doing enough. I think that while certainly there is a constant underscoring of the constitution, but the narrative around that is slightly different. That has more to do with taking away the rights of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Then it has to do specifically with calling out the rampant Islamophobia by the ruling party. I think, and we've all seen this, it's not a secret, that the entire political conversation has shifted. It's no longer, opposition parties consider it no longer prudent to speak up for Muslims in this country. Everyone is trying to basically out-Hindu each other in varying degrees. I'm not painting all with the same brush. But barring, I would say, a handful of exceptions that I'm struggling to think of. I mean, I can think of, for example, the stand taken by, let's say, the Tamil Nadu government and the Kerala government during the CA and NRC protests and how they very much stood shoulder to shoulder with the Muslim community at that time. Barring those few examples, for the most part, the opposition has completely abdicated its responsibility. These falsehoods are going unchecked. If the ruling party says something against anyone from, let's say there's a comment made about Dalits or made about tribals, they will immediately jump and condemn it. But we saw this in the election as well. The Prime Minister was spewing hateful stuff on a regular basis as the campaign progressed. There was no real calling of that out. So the opposition is, I'm glad you brought this up, because it's not just the institutions, the courts, the police, the media. The opposition itself is very much to blame for the fact that there's no pushback.
One last question, gentleman there in the back. Yes.
Hi, privileged to be here. My question is specifically around the power and power balance. One of the oft-repeated cartoons that one comes across is that this guy goes to the bookshop, asks for a copy of the Constitution, and the bookseller says, "We don't sell periodicals." Now, given the way laws are being formed and the Constitution is being amended, we're at 106 right now, and so many of these laws and amendments are inequitable. One of the beliefs that is fundamental to us, we believe that one of the way power flows to the citizens is through the judiciary and the Constitution. Do you think this is also becoming a falsehood these days, given how things are happening?
So I think Vasu did talk about that, how with even the judiciary has to do better in our country, except for a few exceptions from the High Court. The Supreme Court has sort of let us down in a lot of ways. So in some ways, yes. You want to elaborate on that first a little bit more?
No, I'm not sure if I fully got the gist of your question. If you're suggesting that the idea that the courts and the Constitution are still the last recourse, whether that's a falsehood, I don't think I'd go as far as to say that the institution in theory or the Constitution theory is not the last recourse. I think we do have to use that recourse. and we have to challenge those who are pushing back against it. It's just that those who are meant to safeguard the constitution are not able to do so, that there's this internal corrosion, and I think that's the real problem.
The gentleman there.
Thank you. So what you have said for the last 1 hour and what probably have written the book, I have not yet read, but I'm going to read it. But it's not just unique to India. It is happening in a way across the globe. In Europe, we have right-wing governments. In the US, we all know what has happened, and some of the ridiculous things which you said are happening in India also. For example,
Can you ask the question?
yeah. So
Yeah,
is there hope for a counter movement, because it's all about a hopeless kind of situation? That's the tone I'm seeing, hearing both of you in a way. So is there a hope for the counter movement, and what if and how it can happen?
I don't think we meant for our tone to sound as hopeless or like doomsday is coming. Actually, I think we're coming from a place of, yes, we are in a bad situation, but we need to get out of this. Which is why we're calling this out. Otherwise, we would have just sat back and said, oh, fine, I mean, it is what it is, there's nothing we can do about it. The reason we have taken the effort to write a book, to call out these theories and tell you, no, this is not right, this is not right, and this is not true, is because we think there is hope for change. And I truly believe so, because I don't think we can, ummeed pe duniya qaim hai, like you can't survive without having hope for a better future.
So very quickly to add to that, when one talks of a counter movement, frankly, because of the nature of these falsehoods, I'm sorry to sound like a stuck tape recorder, because these are coming from power, because these are coming from a political source or a source of government, the counter to that also ultimately has to be political, right? If today there is an establishment that is spewing this, tomorrow that establishment loses, is not there, that's the shift. So number one, there has to be a political shift. Having said that, there are avenues where civil society can come forward and has come forward. So for example, in Karnataka, there is a fairly active grassroots movement that calls out hate, that calls out bigotry, and that has actually managed to translate some of that into a political consequence as well for the for the ruling party at the time there. So there are such efforts, and there are avenues of hope. But ultimately, you're dealing with a problem at a different level, and so the solution has to be at that level. As the lady said, the opposition, the political opposition, has to respond to what is essentially a problem of power and politics.
Okay, I think we'll be completely out of time, so we'll draw the session to a close. If you have questions, then maybe you can answer them outside this session. On behalf of the HLF, the audience, I want to thank you. Thanks Sreenivasan, thanks Mariyam for coming and speaking to us for an hour and answering all the questions with the details and in a very committed way. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Manjari. Thank you very much, Sreenivasan and Mariyam. Ladies and gentlemen, their book is available at the bookshop, which is here. Grab a copy, and I hope Sreenivasan and Mariyam would agree to sign their copies. So the book is available at the bookshop, at the festival bookshop. You can grab a copy, and they will be happy to sign them for you.